Welcome back. Today we are going to look on other themes that we come across in the text Fathers of Nation. But before that, in our previous lesson, we looked at three major themes, which are corruption, betrayal, and poor leadership. So today we are going to look at other themes that we come across while reading the text Fathers of Nation. So the first thing that you're going to look at is poverty, then plight of women, suffering, oppression, and death, and lastly, change. Poverty. The novel also paints a devastating picture of people with Unai's age of daily survival, international imperialistic networks, control, who've captured and imprisoned the continent. African countries are sucked into meaningless loans with international financial institutions. These development loans have unrealistic demands. As a result, the continent continues to sink into the abyss of poverty. It is in Africa where learned people are impoverished and made beggars. This is a society that does not value knowledge, that cherishes ignorance. Professor Kimani joins the University of Nairobi directly as a senior lecturer from the University of Oxford. At that time, a lecturer earns more than a member of parliament. Later, the parliament stages a coup, and the results are that an MP works up to 100 times the income of the professor. Comrade Melusi notes that in Zimbabwe, it was not easy for people to eat in a hotel. He further notes that for those who eat in a hotel, have visitors or foreigners to foot the bills. At Chaminuka restaurant, Thad Longway clears the bills for himself and that of Comrade Melusi. The international community clamps on Zimbabwe program called Structural Adjustment Program, ASAP. Since the community is undergoing very difficult economic times, African leadership is poor of innovative and creative ideas that would spur economic growth among the African states. Flight of women. Fathers of Nation is basically a story of 4 men from different parts of Africa who, despite going through different misfortunes, try to influence the new document, which is part Alpha. The big question is, where are the women? The book is entitled Fathers of Nation. The title points to the masculinity and the role of these menfolk in the predicament bedeviling the African continent. Aren't there mothers of nations? It speaks to the patriarchal nature of the African continent. Thus, it is challenged to the patriarchal status of Africa and pointing to the question and place of women in society and the possibility of them being the alternative choice. The novel is dominated by male characters ranging from the 4 men from the different parts of Africa who are Professor Kimani from the east, Comrade Melusi from the south, Pastor Chiamaka from the west, and Engineer Tahir from the north, to Dr. Afolabi, the advisor to the Africans Head of State Summit and Part Alpha enthusiast, to the VOA personnel, Mr. Robert Burnley and Mr. Nick Sentinel. Only one woman, Miss Fiona Mackenzie, stands out. Other women play a very minimal and terrestrial role in the development of the story. Tony dies in a road accident. Her mother, Asia, divorces Professor Kimani on the account that Professor's vehicle's condition made their daughter use a public service vehicle, making their only daughter be exposed to accident. Pamela comes back to Nigeria with her husband from America to meet a woman in her bedroom. This angers her and results in her filing for a divorce. 49 heads of state arrive at Banjul Gambia for the Heads of State Summit. None of these heads of state is a woman. They look happy having left their problems back at home. No wonder the title of the text is Fathers of Nation and not Parents or Mothers of Nation. Probably, this does not speak to the patriarchal society Africa is and the role of women played in founding these states. Ziliza, Comrade Melusi's wife, is killed in cold blood, the men believed to be the Zimbabwe's rulers' operatives. Though she is dead, her photo and memory about her seeks Comrade Melusi to avenge against the brutal ruler. Though dead, her spirit lives on, ignites and reminds Comrade Melusi the nature of the current leadership, which is war. Rahima Mahamud is another woman in the text. Miss Mahamud is a junior to Engineer Tahir. Engineer Tahir falls in love with her and proposes to her. She says no to the proposal. This response angers him. He slaps her because of an unclear reason and circumstances. She retaliates, throwing a piece of glass on his eye. She is taken to court and the court reaches a decision of her also losing an eye through surgery. They both lose an eye. This episode speaks of some cultural practices that are outdated. Were it not for the outdated culture, Engineer Tahir would not have slapped Miss Rahim Mahmoud, which led to the spiral effect of both losing an eye. It is high time some of these cultural practices are relooked at. Suffering, oppression, and death. Suffering is at different levels. You have psychological, physical, and emotional. Most of the suffering in the novel are psychological and emotional. Many characters have undergone harrowing experiences that have brought untold suffering to them. Professor Kimani loses his daughter in a road accident. Also loses his wife Asiya to his former colleague at the university and a member of parliament. This loss of wife brings about a fight between him and newborn Walobu. This fight earns an arrest and charges of assault pressed on him. He is jailed for 6 months and a demotion follows thereafter. All this accumulates to a dejected man, which brings a lot of psychological and emotional suffering. He is a disturbed man when Tad Longway comes along and proposes Path Alpha. He readily accepts, for he finds solace in the whole thing. After being rejected by Miss Rahma Mahmoud, Engineer Tahir avenges by slapping her, something she does not take lying down. She retaliates and throws something at him which gets to his eye and slits it. In revenge, Engineer Tahir goes to court to seek justice, and the court rules based on the Arabic law, which calls for gouging out her eye in return. Because of the psychological suffering he undergoes, Tahir leaves Tripoli for Benghazi. Comrade Ngobile Melusi undergoes psychological trauma too. After helping the ruler, he is left to languish in poverty. He is not appointed a minister. When the Ndebele leader misses out on appointment, the southern part of the country, inhabited by the Ndebele, demonstrate and riot. Property and lives are lost. Ziliza, Melusi's wife, dies in the exchange. When his economic status changes and he is forced to go and stay in the slums, which are later on flattened to create way for roads. All this eats on the nerve of Comrade Ngobile Melusi. Pastor Chineke Chiamaka, after his controversial sermon, is arrested. He is later on released and given conditions, among them not to preach something very difficult to live by. The African leaders who are called fathers of nations and oppressors, expose the common citizen to untold suffering. The four men are good narratives of this assertion. After falling out with fathers of nation, Professor Kimani, Pastor Chiamaka, Comrade Melusi, and Engineer Tahir, government meets them and does not give them room to express themselves. They have to be organized by an outside force to seek alternative way from the status quo by advocating for Part Alpha, a new strategy on discourse as opposed to Way Omega. Apart from the physical death of Tony, Ziviz, and many others, there is also death of vision. The fathers of nations have no vision for the continent and direction for their countries. The discussion at the summit is jerky and disorganized. There's also death of vision of our founding fathers of nations. The vision was to fight ignorance, disease, and poverty. Several years after independence, the continent is still wallowing in miasm of confusion and stagnation. Change and transition. Change is inevitable. Change in the fathers of nations has been realized at two levels. They are physical and ideological. Physically, the four men draw from the four corners of the African continent have undergone evolution and tremendous change. Professor Kimani, after undergoing the humiliations in the hands of newborn Malub and the government operatives, he is a totally different man. Comrade Melosi's experience in the hands of the ruler of his country leaves him a bitter man. Engineer Tahir is also a depressed man, courtesy of his endeavors with Miss Mahmoud and the lack of support towards Feast of Allah. Meanwhile, Pastor Chiamaka is transformed after being involved in an accident to a very powerful pastor.
Ideologically, the wind of change has swept across Africa. Although the fathers of nations have scheduled to deliberate on Way Omega while at the summit, Path Alpha surprisingly finds its way on the agenda of the summit, and again, against all odds, it is the strategy that goes through and is adopted. In the new strategy, Professor Kimani, Pastor Chiamaka, Comrade Melusi, and Engineer Tahir are hopeful that most of the challenges they are facing as a continent will be a thing of the past.